Dust rose like smoke above the wooden chapel, blurring the horizon where the sun hung low and hot. The bells rang, cracked and uneven, their music drowned by the murmur of townsfolk gathered in their Sunday best. The bride stepped forward, her veil trembling with each step, her white dress tight across her frame. Clara Mayfield felt the fabric dig into her waist, the thread straining, but she held her chin high. Laughter rippled through the crowd, not soft or hidden, but sharp, cruel, tossed like stones in her direction. She heard one man whisper, "Looks like the rancher's marrying a milk cow," and another woman cackle, "That dress will split before vows are spoken." Clara kept walking. Her shoes sank into the dust, the hem already brown from the earth. She focused on the chapel doors ahead, not the eyes piercing her. She had grown up with eyes like that, eyes that measure her by weight, not worth, orphaned early, raised by an aunt whose tongue was sharper than a knife. Clara had learned that fat was shame and beauty belonged to others. Yet here she was, in white, moving toward a man she hardly knew. The laughter cut deeper than any seamstress's needle, but beneath it she nursed a single ember of hope, that this marriage could be her escape from scorn, her chance to be more than the joke she had always been. The priest shifted nervously at the altar, flipping through his Bible as though the verses might shield him from the cruelty outside. Jedediah Cole, the groom, was late. Clara's heart pounded with each passing second, each snicker that rose louder as the absence stretched. The townsfolk muttered, "He's changed his mind. Can't blame him. Imagine kissing that face every morning." Clara clenched her fist beneath her veil. If he did not come, the humiliation would follow her forever, brand her worse than before. Then hooves struck the dirt, loud and fast, and all heads turned. A horse galloped into view, carrying a man whose shoulders carried the weight of miles and battles. Jedediah swung down, tall, scarred, his jaw shadowed by a day's worth of grit. His eyes, when they met Clara's, did not soften. They flicked over her once, unreadable, then shifted to the crowd. Laughter turned to whispers. He adjusted his hat and strode forward, boots heavy on the chapel steps. Clara could not tell if his silence meant regret or simple weariness. The ceremony stumbled into motion, the priest clearing his throat, stammering over the opening words. Clara felt sweat pool under her dress, the air thick with heat and humiliation. She dared a glance at Jedediah, hoping for reassurance, but his gaze was distant, fixed on nothing. Her chest tightened. Was she already a burden? Already a mistake? And then movement. A little girl broke free from the cluster of guests, running with untamed hair and dust-stained boots. She reached the groom, tugged at his sleeve, and with a voice unclouded by malice, she looked up at Clara and said, "She is pretty, Daddy." The words cracked the silence. The crowd froze, laughter stilled mid-breath. Even the wind seemed to pause. Clara's throat tightened, her vision blurred behind the veil. In all her life, no one had ever spoken those words to her. Not her aunt, not a suitor, not a friend. Pretty. The syllables rang louder than the jeers, carving through her fear like sunlight through storm clouds. Jedediah stiffened, caught between his daughter's innocent conviction and the judgmental eyes of the crowd. He did not smile, did not echo the words, but something in his posture shifted, less rigid, less dismissive. Clara clung to that flicker, fragile though it was. The priest hesitated, his hands trembling over the Bible, waiting for someone to break the spell. The crowd shifted uncomfortably, whispers rising again but softer this time, uncertain. Clara's pulse thundered in her ears. She felt as though the world balanced on the child words. That one simple truth spoken by unguarded lips had shaken the entire town. Her knees nearly buckled beneath her, but she forced herself to stand taller. She had come this far, endured this much. Perhaps she could endure more. Yet she sensed something dangerous beneath the stillness, like a storm gathering just out of sight. The priest cleared his throat again. Jedediah glanced at Clara, the first true look since his arrival. In his eyes she caught no pity, no open disgust, but a question, as though he was trying to see past the veil, past the body, to the woman standing before him. The child's hand clung to her father's sleeve. The townsfolk held their breath. The bride stood in dust and silence, the echo of that single phrase, "She is pretty," ringing inside her like a bell that would never stop. And in that pause, Before vowels were spoken, Clara felt the earth shift beneath her. Something had begun, something that laughter could not kill and silence could not bury. A storm was coming, and she knew this wedding was only the spark. The ranch lay quiet beneath a blood-red sunset, its fences stretching across fields that seemed too wide for comfort. Clara stood on the porch, her hands raw from scrubbing, her back aching from hauling water, but her spirit refused to yield. She had been in this place only weeks, yet already the walls carried her scent, the hearth her touch. Still, the town's words clung to her like burrs in fabric. They called her useless, clumsy, more mouth than help. She heard them at the well, at the mercantile, whispered with sharp smiles. Jedediah's fat bride won't last winter. Each phrase lodged in her chest, but each morning she rose earlier, worked harder, until sweat dripped down her spine and her fingers blistered. Annie's laughter became her only refuge. The child sought her out from the first day, curling up in Clara's skirts, pulling her to the stable to pet the horses, begging for stories before bed. Clara told her tales of rivers that sparkled like silver and skies that sang, stories she had once imagined to escape her own loneliness. Annie's eyes shone wide in the firelight, and in those moments Clara felt almost whole. Yet Jedediah remained a shadow at the edge of her life. He ate in silence, eyes fixed on the wood grain of the table. He worked with a tireless focus, never lifting his gaze long enough to see the woman beside him. Clara wondered if he spoke to her only out of duty, if Annie's presence was the sole thread holding their union together. One evening, Clara overheard a group of men gathered near the saloon. They spoke of raiders who had struck a ranch 2 valleys over, stealing cattle, leaving bodies in the dust. The men laughed when Jedediah's name was mentioned. He's got that soft bride now. Doubt she can lift a rifle, let alone hold the place when trouble comes. Clara lingered in the shadows, the words slicing through her. Shame burned, but beneath it, anger stirred, a slow, simmering heat. She returned to the ranch with their mockery ringing in her ears, her steps quick and tight with resolve. The first sign of danger came on a night when the wind whistled strange through the canyon. Clara sat by the hearth, stitching a tear in Annie's dress, when she noticed a faint glow beyond the hills. Not moonlight, fire. Her breath caught. She moved to the window, the stitch hanging unfinished, and saw torches weaving like snakes in the darkness. Shadows moved with them, mounted riders advancing. Her stomach twisted. The raiders had come. Clara's first instinct was to protect the child. She snatched Annie from her play by the hearth and pressed her into Jedediah's arms as he stormed in from outside, already reaching for his rifle. "Keep her safe," Clara said, though her voice trembled. She turned, her hands finding the old shotgun mounted above the door. The weight of it nearly dragged her arms down, but she held it close, her knuckles white. The night erupted in chaos. Hooves thundered against the earth. Gunfire cracked the silence. Shouts split the air. Clara felt her body move before her mind could catch up. She pushed through the doorway, the shotgun heavy, the air thick with smoke and dust. A rider charged toward the porch, his face twisted in a snarl, a pistol flashing in his hand. Clara raised the weapon, her finger clumsy on the trigger. The blast shook her to the bone. The raider toppled from his horse, a scream torn from him as he hit the ground. For a heartbeat, everything froze. Clara's ears rang, the smoke acrid in her nose, the recoil bruising her shoulder. Then the world crashed back. Another rider fired, bullets splintering the porch post. She stumbled back, her heart clawing at her chest. Jedediah's voice roared through the din, sharp and commanding, but she heard only fragments. "Hold the line! Drive them back!" The raiders circled, shadows flickering through firelight. Clara reloaded, her hands shaking so badly the shells nearly slipped. Fear pressed heavy against her ribs, yet deeper still, beneath the terror, a fierce determination took root. Annie's frightened face flashed before her eyes, small hands clutching her skirts, innocent trust in every glance. Clara squared her shoulders and lifted the shotgun again. The skirmish dragged into breathless minutes. Horses screamed. Flames licked the dry grass, and Clara fired until her arms trembled. One shot grazed a rider's leg. sending him sprawling. Another struck the ground, so close to a horse that the beast reared and threw its master. She could barely believe the steadiness that began to build inside her, as though the heat of the fight burned away the doubt she had carried for years. Then, as suddenly as it began, the attack faltered. The raiders pulled back, their leader's voice carrying above the chaos. "We'll be back for blood." Their silhouettes melted into the darkness, the torches vanishing one by one, until only smoke lingered. Silence fell heavy and raw, broken only by Annie's muffled sobs inside the house. Clara lowered the shotgun, her arms weak, her lungs dragging in air like she had run miles. Jedediah stood at the edge of the yard, his chest heaving, his rifle still raised. He turned toward her, and for the first time since their vows, his eyes locked on hers. Not empty, not indifferent. Shock and something else, something closer to recognition, flashed there. Her shoulder throbbed from the recoil, her dress smudged with soot, but Clara did not falter. She met his gaze, unyielding, though her heart threatened to burst from her chest. The mocking voices of the town seemed to fade into nothing. She had stood, she had fought, and though the raiders had fled, she knew they would return, stronger, hungrier. The thought should have filled her with dread, yet a strange fire flickered in her veins instead. The storm was not over, only delayed, and she would be ready when it came. She had no choice now. For Annie, for herself, for the name she carried, and the life she refused to surrender. The ranch bore scars from the night of fire and bullets. Fences splintered. The barn doors hung crooked, and patches of blackened grass marked where flames had tried to swallow the land. Clara moved among the wreckage, her hand steady as she bound wounds, cleared debris, and comforted Annie, who clung to her like a shadow. She carried herself differently now, each step firm, each task performed without hesitation. But when she caught Jedediah's eyes on her, the confidence faltered. His gaze lingered, not with mockery, but with something harder to name, something caught between gratitude and grief. He turned away before she could hold it. That night, as she rinsed blood from rags of the basin, she overheard him outside, speaking low to a neighbor who had come to offer aid. "She's stronger than I expected," Jedediah admitted, the words gruff. Then, after a pause, softer, "But she's not Sarah." Clara's hand stilled in the water. The rags slipped, sinking into the basin. Not Sarah. The name struck like a blade. She had never heard it spoken aloud in their home, though she had sensed its presence in the silences, in the distance between them at the table, in the coldness of his bed. Now she knew. Sarah was the ghost at the heart of this marriage. Clara stepped outside later. When the neighbor had gone, Jedediah sat on the porch, rifle across his knees, his face carved from stone. She wanted to speak, to ask, but the words clung to her throat. Instead, she turned back inside, her chest tight. In the quiet of the small bedroom, Annie stirred from sleep, whispering, "Mama." The word pierced Clara's grief. She sat beside the child, smoothing tangled hair, swallowing her tears. "I'm here," she murmured. Annie nestled closer, her trust unshaken, her small arms wrapping around Clara's waist. The child's faith was a lifeline, and yet it deepened the ache. How could she be Mama when the man who mattered most saw only another woman's shadow? The following days passed in strained rhythm. Clara worked from dawn to dusk, her body aching, but she carried her pain in silence. Jedediah repaired fences, rode the boundaries, spoke little. When their eyes met, Clara saw conflict etched there, but no resolution. Nights stretched long, sleepless, as the raiders' promise haunted her. Every creak of the barn, every howl of wind to the canyon sounded like the approach of hoofbeats. Clara knew fear well, but this time it carried a sharper edge. Fear not only of attack, but of being powerless again. She began to rise before dawn. In the pale gray light, when Jedediah and Annie still slept, Clara stole away with a shotgun. Her hand shook the first mornings, the weapon awkward in her grasp, but she forced herself to learn. She practiced loading shells until her fingers no longer fumbled, raised a barrel until her arms grew steady, fired into the barren earth until her shoulder toughened against the recoil. Each blast echoed across the valley, loud enough to remind her she was no longer helpless. With each sunrise, the fear loosened, replaced by resolve. The land itself seemed to acknowledge her transformation. Where once she had been a stranger, fumbling and doubted, now the earth felt like something she could claim. She shoveled muck from the stables without complaint, guided the plow mule with confidence, and stood tall when she passed townsfolk who still whispered. Let them whisper, she thought. They had not seen her in the smoke, had not heard the thunder of her gun. They had not seen the raider fall. Still, Jedediah's silence cut deeper than their gossip. He noticed her training. She caught him watching from the porch, arms crossed, expression unreadable, but he never spoke of it. Once, she dared to hold his gaze, sweat running down her face as she reloaded with quickened skill. His eyes narrowed, then flicked away. She longed for words, for some sign that he saw her as more than duty, but the silence stretched. One evening, as the horizon bled with dusk, Jedediah finally broke it. You should rest. You've worked enough for 10 men. His voice carried no warmth, only weariness. Clara lowered the shotgun, dust clinging to her skirts, her chest rising with breathless defiance. If they come back, resting won't save us. He studied her for a long moment, his jaw tight, then nodded once, a gesture small but heavy. It was not praise, not affection, but it was acknowledgement. For Clara, it was enough to keep going. The next day, a rider arrived from town with news. The raiders had regrouped. They were stronger, bolder, preparing for another strike. Fear rippled through the valley, neighbors fortifying their homes, mothers clutching children tighter. The man delivered the warning quickly, eyes darting as if the danger already pressed at his back. Clara stood behind Jedediah as he listened, her hands damp with sweat. When the rider left, Jedediah remained still, staring at the horizon as though he could see the threat crawling nearer. Finally, he turned to her. His face was no longer stone, but strained, uncertain. We can't win this fight alone. The admission hung between them, heavy as the clouds that gathered over the plain. Clara met his eyes, her breath steady despite the dread coiling in her stomach. This was the moment she had been forging herself toward, the moment her resolve would matter most. She straightened her back, refusing to shrink beneath the weight of it. Then we won't be alone, she said quietly, though her voice carried steel. Jedediah studied her in silence, as though seeing her for the first time. The distance between them narrowed, not closed, not yet, but lessened. Annie's laughter drifted from inside, innocent and fragile, a reminder of what was at stake. Clara's heart swelled with equal parts fear and fire. She would not let the girl down. She would not let herself be erased by shadows of the past. The storm was coming, promised by the crackle in the air and the memory of torches on the horizon. Clara felt it in her bones. And this time, she would not meet it as the woman they had laughed at. She would meet it as someone who had been broken, bruised, and remade in fire. Someone who had no intention of yielding again. The air thickened with the promise of violence. Word of the raiders' return had spread like wildfire, and fear pressed heavy upon every corner of the valley. At the coal ranch, preparations turned the once quiet homestead into a fortress. Clara stood at the center of it, sleeves rolled, voice steady, giving direction as though she had commanded men all her life. She showed neighbors where to stack barrels, how to string wire across the yard, where to set lanterns to blind riders charging under cover of night. Even the most doubtful eyes began to follow her lead, though some whispered still the strangeness of a bride giving orders. Jedediah said nothing, but he watched, his silence no longer cold but contemplative, as though each movement of hers carved new lines of respect into his mind. Annie clung to Clara's skirts as she worked, wide eyes darting from hammering men to sharpened blades. "Will they hurt us, Mama?" she whispered. Clara knelt, brushing the child's hair back from her forehead. "Not if we stand strong," she said, though fear knotted her stomach. The girl's trust steadied her, even as the wind rose, carried with it the smell of rain and smoke that hadn't yet touched the earth. Night came, moonless and tense. Lanterns flickered in the yard, throwing long shadows across the dirt. Every creak of the barn, every cry of an owl set nerves on edge. Then came the sound they all dreaded, the low, rhythmic thunder of hooves rolling through the canyon. The raiders had arrived. Clara felt her pulse quicken, but she gripped the shotgun as if it were an extension of herself. Jedediah moved to her side, rifle in hand, his face grim. Their eyes met, and for once there was no barrier between them. No ghost, no laughter from the past, only the shared resolve of survival. The first wave hit with a roar. Riders poured through the darkness, torches blazing, bullets tearing through the night air. Horses shrieked, dogs barked. Children cried from inside the barricaded house. Clara stood her ground, shouting for the defenders to hold steady. Her voice carried over the chaos, strong and unshaken. A rider broke from the pack, his pistol aimed directly at the porch. Clara fired, the blast rocking her back, but the man tumbled from his saddle, his weapon clattering useless to the dirt. Cheers erupted from behind her, quick and desperate, and Clara felt a surge of fierce fire in her veins. The fight grew thick and merciless. Raiders crashed against the makeshift barricades, steel striking wood, gunfire flashing like lightning. Clara reloaded with practiced hands, sweat stinging her eyes, the acrid scent of powder filling her lungs. Beside her, Jedediah fought with the precision of a man who had seen too much war, yet Evie seemed startled by the ferocity with which she held the line. More than once, he glanced at her not in disbelief, but with something like awe. A lull came only when the raider leader rode forward, his silhouette broad against the glow of fire. His voice cut through the din, mocking and cruel. "Hide behind your fat bride, Cole. She's worth less than the land will burn." Laughter rose from his men, sharp and biting, but it no longer pierced Clara's heart the way it once would have. She stepped forward, shotgun raised, her body trembling not from fear, but from fury. "This land won't burn, and neither will I," she spat, her voice carrying clear. The leader dismounted, advancing with a sneer. He drew a blade, its edge glinting in the lantern light. The world seemed to narrow to the space between them, the noise of battle fading. Clara's grip tightened. When he lunged, she met him head-on, slamming her weight into his chest. They tumbled into the dirt, his knife slicing across her sleeve but missing flesh. He cursed, straining against her strength, but she drove above the shotgun into his jaw. Blood sprayed, his eyes wide with shock at the power he had mocked. Jedediah moved to strike, rifle raised, but Clara fired first. The blast lit the night, and the leader fell limp in the dust. For a breathless second, the yard went still. Then the raiders, seeing their master down, broke apart, their courage crumbling. One by one, they fled into the darkness, leaving only silence and the stench of smoke in their wake. Clara staggered to her feet, chest heaving, arms trembling from the force of what she had done. Jedediah caught her before she fell. His hand steadied her back, his eyes searching hers with a rawness she had never seen. No shadows of Sarah lingered there now. Only Clara, only the woman who had stood in fire and refused to fall. Annie burst from the doorway, tears streaking her cheeks, her little boots pounding across the dirt. She flung herself into Clara's arms, sobbing with relief. "Mama's the bravest," she cried, her voice breaking through the night with pure conviction. Clara held her tight, her heart swelling so fiercely it felt as if it might tear open. When dawn came, light spilling over the battered ranch, the land bore scars but still stood. Neighbors gathered, eyes wide with respect, voices hushed with something like reverence. Clara moved among them, no longer bowed beneath their judgment, but walking tall, shoulders straight, chin lifted. She had faced a storm and endured, and in their silence, she knew they saw her not as the plump bride, not as the object of ridicule, but as a woman who had fought and won. Later, as the days stretched long and weary, Jedediah found her by the corral, the quiet broken only by the soft wicker horses. He stood close, his voice low. "I was blind," he admitted. "You've given me back more than I deserve." His words carried no flourish, but they rang with truth. Clara met his gaze, her own steady. She did not need apology to know her worth, but the honesty in his tone soothed the last ache in her chest. She looked out at the land, scarred yet steadfast, and felt something within her settle. For the first time, she saw herself not through others' eyes, not through cruel whispers or long shadows, but through the strength she had proven. She was beautiful, not in delicate glass or flawless silk, but in fire, in endurance, in love. And though the valley would remember the laughter that once mocked her, it would remember more fiercely the night she rose from it, the night she burned the cruelty of the world to ash. If this story stirred your heart, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments. Because sometimes the bravest battles are fought not with bullets, but with the courage to stand, to love, and to endure.